What if Operation Highjump was real? On December 2nd, 1946, 13 United States Navy ships left Norfolk, Virginia, and steamed south. 4,700 men were aboard. They carried fighter planes, flying boats, transport aircraft, snowcats, tanks modified for ice, and enough supplies to operate independently for months. Nothing close to the size of the fleet had ever gone south. Nothing close has been attempted since. You almost never saw the formal name. The fleet, the press, and the cables back to Washington all called the Operation Highjump. That was the code name. That was the name the men knew. Rear Admiral Richard E. Byrd led it. He was the most decorated naval officer in American history. In 1926, he had flown over the North Pole. By 1939, he had set up the United States Antarctic Service. By the time Highjump launched, he had spent more time in the polar regions than almost any other American alive. The roster of ships matters, because the fleet that went south is not the fleet that was needed for the stated mission. A seaplane tender called the USS Pine Island, a carrier called the USS Philippine Sea, a destroyer called the USS Brownson, a submarine called the USS Sen, flying boats the PBY Catalina, which could land on open water, transport planes the R-4D, the Navy version of the DC-3. Ships, submarines, and carrier aircraft are not what you need to set up a research base on the ice. They are what you need if you expect to fight something on the ice, or to be seen to be ready to fight something. By Christmas, they were past the equator. By early January, they were in the Antarctic pack ice. On January 12th, the flying boats lifted off and began the first flights over the continent. What they were actually doing there has been argued about for 75 years. The order came from the Chief of Naval Operations on August 26, 1946. It was classified. It listed 3 official objectives. Training personnel and testing equipment in Antarctic conditions was the first. Useful in its own right, the Navy would need cold weather capability if the post-war world went sideways. So the training was, on its face, defensive preparation. Establishing Little America 4, the new research base, was the second. The base was meant to support a year-round program of scientific work. The work would be open to civilian scientists. The base would be the foundation of a long-term American presence on the continent. Extending American territorial claims was the third. 7 countries had staked parts of the continent at the end of the war. The United States had not formally claimed any of it. The operation was meant to put American boots on enough of the ice that no future settlement could be made without American consent. Put together, the 3 objectives do not require a fleet of 13 ships, 4,700 men, and 6 months of operations. A single icebreaker and a small research party would have done the job. A Coast Guard cutter would have done the job. The disparity between what the order said and the scale of what was sent is where the rumors started. You do not put a carrier group in Antarctic waters to set up a weather station. Byrd's own correspondence, much of it declassified in the 1990s, hints that he expected more than the order described. Additional communications equipment was on the request list. So was additional medical staff. So was additional personnel trained in chemical and biological warfare detection. None of these requests were in the public order. What the requests were for, in operational terms, was the ability to handle something the Navy had not yet acknowledged was a possibility. 3 months after the operation officially ended, a Chilean newspaper published a story, March 1947. The story was attributed to a crewman on one of the flying boats who was not named. According to the story, the Antarctic flights had encountered hostile aircraft. The hostile aircraft were disc-shaped. The hostile aircraft were faster than anything the Navy had in service. One of the PBY Catalinas was shot down. Within weeks, the story was in a Brazilian paper. An Argentine paper picked it up. A magazine in Mexico ran a version. By the end of the spring, The story was in 100 papers in 12 countries. The crewman was never named. A transcript was never produced. A photograph was never produced. The story had the shape of a wire service dispatch, but the dispatch did not exist. In retrospect, almost certainly, the story was invented by someone in a newsroom who had no idea what was actually happening, but knew the story would print. The story did not go away. It sat in the air. It was waiting for someone to attach it to. In 1965, a German-American author named Wolfgang Lüth published a book in West Germany. The book was called Flug über den Südpol, Flight over the South Pole. Lüth wrote that Admiral Byrd had personally led a flight into the interior of the continent in early February 1947. The flight had encountered UFOs, the book said. The flight had been attacked. Byrd had been wounded. He had been evacuated to a hospital in New Zealand. None of Lüth's claims have been verified. None appear in any declassified U.S. Navy record from the operation. The book is the source of most of what is now the Highjump mythology, and the book is not a reliable source. Lüth published in West Germany in the mid-60s with no corroboration and no primary documentation. The story is, in form, almost identical to the stories that surrounded the 1947 Roswell incident, a real operation in a real remote place that the government handled in unusual ways. A story that grows in the press, in books, in magazine articles, in documentaries, with each retelling adding a layer of detail that was not in the original. The most cited survivor of the alleged attack is a Navy officer named Bell. The full name is rarely given in the UFO literature. The first name is sometimes given as Arthur. The rank is sometimes given as lieutenant. Almost none of the details match across tellings. You are told that Bell was on one of the flying boats. The plane he was on was the one that was attacked. Bell was injured in the attack. He was evacuated to New Zealand afterward. Bell told a nurse what he had seen. The nurse passed the story to a researcher in the 1970s. The researcher told it to a UFO magazine in 1980. "Look at that chain," Bell told the nurse. The nurse told a researcher. The researcher told a magazine. The people are not named. The transmissions are not dated. The accounts are not independently verified. You cannot build a historical claim on a chain of hearsay where nobody is named. The story has the structure of every UFO survivor story, because the structure is what lets the story travel. A real person in danger. A real institution that is hiding the truth. A chain of small witnesses who each have a small piece. A researcher who puts the pieces together. A publication that brings the story to a wider audience. Roswell, Phoenix Lights, Travis Walton, the same structure. The structure is not proof. The structure is the genre. No U.S. Navy officer who served on the operation has ever corroborated the survivor story. No member of the 4,700 men who went south has ever corroborated it. No family member of any of those men has ever corroborated it. The story lives in the UFO literature. It does not live in the Navy archives. This does not prove the story is false. It proves that no one who was there has ever said it is true. Rear Admiral Byrd's official report on the operation was issued in April 1947. It is 55 pages. The report covers the operation in detail. The ships, the commanders, the aircraft, the landing sites. The weather is described. The flying conditions are described. The scientific work, the equipment testing, the construction of Little America IV are described. Hostile aircraft are not mentioned. Disc-shaped craft are not mentioned. A pilot being shot down is not mentioned. A wounded admiral is not mentioned. The report is the declassified primary source. The report is the closest thing to a definitive account we have. Success is the official U.S. Navy position on the operation. The stated objectives, the position says, were accomplished. No anomalous encounters occurred. the position says. The official position is the same as the official position of the U.S. government on most UFO claims. The events did not happen. The events were misidentified. The events were exaggerated in the press. The official position is consistent with the report, which is what makes it credible. The declassified records are consistent with the official position, which is what makes it durable. The men who went south, in their letters and memoirs, support the official position, which is what makes it hard to dismiss. By definition, the official position is also the position that the people in the UFO literature say is the cover. There is no specific document that has been called the cover. There is no specific order that has been alleged. No specific person who knows has been named. The cover in the UFO literature is a general pattern of denial. The pattern is the cover. You can believe the report. You can believe the cover. You cannot believe both, because they describe different events. What the men who went south say in their letters and their memoirs is closer to the report than to the cover. Cold, they say. Hard, they say. The weather was worse than the equipment was built for. The flying was dangerous. The science was good. They do not say they were attacked. A longer story about Nazi Germany and Antarctica is where the UFO literature connects the Highjump story. The longer story is older than Highjump. It starts in 1938. A German expedition was conducted in Antarctica in 1938 and 1939. Neue Schwabenland, New Swabia was the name. The ship was the MS Schwabenland. Part of the coastline was mapped. German flags were dropped on parts of the continent. Ice-free land was photographed. Samples were taken. The expedition returned to Germany in April 1939, a few months before the war started. Alfred Richter led the expedition. Hermann Göring funded it. The German Air Ministry supported it. It was an act of territorial claim. It was the first serious German claim on the Antarctic. German bases do not appear in the declassified records. German-built infrastructure does not show up as having survived. Post-war German activity in Antarctica would not have justified a U.S. Navy carrier group. None of the thousands of German records captured after the war show a German plan for an Antarctic base. None show a German expedition that escaped to Antarctica at the end of the war. None show German U-boats operating in the Southern Ocean after the German surrender. The high-jump Nazi connection in the UFO literature is, in the actual records, absent. A 1,947 book, Shakedown on the Sun, by a writer using the pseudonym R.L. Mills, is one of the things that has kept the connection alive. A series of post-war books that have cited each other in an unbroken chain back to Mills is another. None of the citations lead to a primary source. None lead to a declassified record. None lead to a named witness. By every standard of evidence, the Nazi thread in the Highjump story is a post-war invention. By every measure of repetition, the Nazi thread is also one of the most repeated parts of the story, because the Nazi thread makes the story older, more layered, and more interesting than the U.S. Navy alone would have made it. On the early internet, the story took its modern form. UFO researchers in the 1990s and 2000s assembled the press rumors, the Lüth book, the post-war UFO magazine articles, and the Nazi-Antarctica mythology into a single narrative. The narrative is the Highjump story you can read on hundreds of websites today. In 2004, History Channel aired a documentary called Hunt for the Nazi Ice Fortress. Genuine archival footage of Highjump was mixed with dramatized reconstructions. Statements by Navy veterans were mixed with statements by UFO researchers. On screen, the two kinds of statement were not distinguished. After the documentary aired, the story was on cable TV, on early YouTube, on forums. It is now part of the standard UFO canon. You will find it in hundreds of YouTube videos, in thousands of Reddit threads, on hundreds of conspiracy theory websites. It is, in some ways, the canonical example of how a post-war UFO story gets built and disseminated in the Internet age. The story is, by any measure, what the Internet made of the declassified record. The story is not, by any measure, what the declassified record says happened. The declassified record says it was cold and dangerous, and important science was done. The Internet version says the Navy was attacked by disc-shaped craft that shot down a pilot. Both stories are about the same operation. The declassified record is the primary source. The Internet version is the primary source plus imagination. Both stories will keep being told. The ice will not change. The records will not change. The interesting stories about the ice will keep being told by people who did not go south, about events that did not happen to people who were not there. Operation Highjump was a real operation. The fleet was real. The men were real. The flying boats were real. The Antarctic weather was real. The work that was done was real. The reports that were filed are real and declassified and available at the National Archives. What the operation was actually for is the question that the UFO literature has been answering for 75 years. Training, research, and territorial claim is the official answer. The declassified record supports the official answer. The Navy has given the same official answer consistently since 1947. A military response to UFO activity in Antarctica is the alternative answer. A chain of press rumors from 1947 supports the alternative answer. So does a 1965 book with unverifiable claims, a 1970s UFO magazine article by a researcher citing anonymous nurses, a post-war Nazi-Antarctica mythology with no primary sources, and a 2004 cable TV documentary that mixed archival footage with dramatized reconstructions. Boring is what the official answer is. Supported is also what the official answer is. Interesting is what the alternative answer is. Less supported is what the alternative answer is. You can decide which kind of answer you want to trust. The choice is yours. The evidence is in the record. What the record does not contain and what the record cannot contain is the operation the men felt they were part of. They went south. They saw the ice. They flew into weather that killed 3 of them. They did the work. They came home. Whatever they believed about what they had been part of, they mostly kept to themselves. The question, ultimately, is this: was the boring answer kept from being interesting, or was the interesting answer built from a few press rumors and a lot of imagination? The sky will not change. The ice will not change. The declassified records will not change. The interesting stories about the ice will keep being told. The question will sit in the space between the record and the rumor until one of them is the answer you have been waiting for.